Everybody. Well, just for the sake of time, we'll go ahead and get started. We have a smaller group today, so it definitely can be a discussion. Please feel free to have your camera on or come off mic and chat with us as you feel comfortable. But to start, my name is Kylie Stam. I serve as the Diversity Program Manager at the Elliott School. Thank you so much for joining us. This is day 2 of our Inclusive Excellence Week series, and we have some programs on the horizon tomorrow as well. If you're interested, I can put the calendar link in the chat box afterwards. But we're really excited about our session today, Cultivating Community through Affinity Spaces, a conversation with young Black professionals in international affairs. And I actually started in my role 1.5 years ago, and I was just saying, Hannah was actually one of the first students I met when I started, and she came with a packet of paper and said, I have this idea. What do I need to do and how can I make it happen? And so it's really exciting for it to be 1.5 years later and be able to have this conversation and share it with all of you. So before we begin, we just want to share with the community that GW resides on the traditional and ancestral homelands of the Piscataway and Anacostan peoples who have served as stewards of the region for generations. And even though we're gathering virtually, we're still gathering as part of the GW community. So we like to honor and uplift those communities. So just for technology, this is a meeting style, so we'd love to interact with folks as much as they'd like to interact with us. You have the ability to turn on your camera and microphone at any time. And we also have some great people in the room, so I'm gonna let you know who we're working with. Mike Tapscott is gonna be our moderator for the discussion today. He's the director of the Multicultural Student Services Center, and he's celebrating his 44th year in university work. After short stops at Gallaudet University and Medford High School, he has additional experience at Tufts, American, George Mason, Regent University Graduate School, and almost 18 years here at the George Washington University. His work experience includes teaching, coaching athletics, physical education, university housing, residence life, cross-training and financial aid, NCAA compliance, undergraduate and graduate admissions, and cultural and academic minority student affairs. So he's done a couple things, and I think he'll contribute pretty well to this space. We also have 3 amazing student leaders who are members of Young Black Professionals in International Affairs. First, we have Hannah Jackson, who is the founder and president of YBPIA. And Hannah is a sophomore from Atlanta, Georgia, in the Elliott School, majoring in international affairs with a concentration in comparative, political, economic, and social systems in Africa. She's committed to creating, preparing, and sustaining a pipeline of African and African diaspora, African-American, Afro-Latinx, Afro-Caribbean students to challenge the status quo in the field of international relations through both her major and student organization, which she founded, and that would be YBPIA. We have Maya Burrell, a sophomore in the Elliott School and co-president of YBPIA, majoring in international affairs and economics with a concentration in contemporary cultures and politics and Africa. She's also a student worker for the Humanitarian Action Initiative here at the Elliott School, where she works to cultivate the school's curriculum, scholarly research, and policy expertise on topics related to humanitarian action. She's committed to providing and expanding academic and professional spaces for students of African descent while promoting the initiatives and goals of YBPIA. Last but certainly not least, we have Simeon Parker, the VP and Vice President of YBPIA. He's also a sophomore in the Elliott School, pursuing a BA in International Affairs, concentrating in International Environmental Studies. In addition to helping develop the foundation of YBPIA as Vice President, Simeon will be starting as a programs intern with the American Council on Renewable Energy to continue learning more about the field of environmental sustainability and take steps towards his goal to be on the forefront of the global transition to a circular economy. Thank you to all 4 of you for joining us today, and I'm going to turn it over to Mike to get our conversation started.
Thank you, Kylie, and welcome everyone. Good afternoon. The conversation around affinity spaces is something that I hold particularly dear, as the Multicultural Student Services Center is clearly an affinity space in a number of ways. And one of the things I'd like to not only hear from the students, but also challenge the participants thinking around is the notion of affinity spaces from a philosophical perspective, from an emotional perspective, as well as from a physical perspective. And so I'd like to just invite you to ask questions if you have them. If you hear something uncomfortable, please speak up, use the chat actively if you would like. And if you do have a question, raise a hand. We'll keep this open from the very beginning. For me, affinity spaces are just critical parts of organizations and how we shape them. You'll certainly hear from these three young people as we talk along. So I'm going to start with the first question, and I'm going to start with Hannah, but I'd also like Maya and Simeon to respond as well. And the last thing I do before I get started is also to thank Kylie, who's put a lot of work and energy not only into this week's programs in terms of the Inclusive Excellence Week, but also just her work with this particular group. So first question is, Hannah, can you share what the purpose of the YBPIA is and what motivated you to create it in the Elliott School? And then Maya and Simeon, if you could follow in that question as well, that would be great. Thank you.
Sure. And thank you for that. And thank you, Kylie, for, again, organizing this and inviting us to participate today. And so as Kylie mentioned, I'm the president and founder of YBPIA, and we are both a GW student organization, as well as an Elliott affiliated organization founded in July of 2020 with the purpose of increasing and amplifying African and African diaspora meaning African American, Afro-Caribbean, and Afro-Latinx perspectives in both the Elliott School of International Affairs and the field of international relations overall through mentorship, professional and academic development, and community. And what really led me deciding within just around 5 months of me being at GW, the first semester of my freshman year, was that there was a real need for a space, a support network, and a form of representation within the Elliott School that was and still is in a lot of ways lacking. And so it really started with me first recognizing a need and taking it upon myself to not just complain about the lack of diverse perspectives in and outside of the classroom, but instead acting on it. And I guess being the change I wanted to see, and quite frankly, needed to see as one of maybe 10 Black students in some of my lecture halls of about 200 students. But in my first year at GW, I quickly realized that through my professor's syllabi, curricula, and the pedagogical models used in the classroom, that they were reflective of one narrative, one side of history, that essentially epitomized the United States as the vanguard of all progress, development, and cooperation abroad without critically examining or even at times acknowledging the mishaps of US foreign policy and diplomacy, both historically and presently. And so I remember quite vividly expressing my concerns to my TA. For the first class I taken in Elliott called Intro to International Affairs. It's a class all the freshmen have to take as an IA major, taught by Professor Brown then. And my TA suggested a book called, because I was working on my end of the semester paper, and I was struggling because most of the readings that we were asked to use to support our argument were very Eurocentric in ideology. And so I found it difficult to, I guess, argue in favor of something using scholarship that I knew it was not entirely true. And so my TA recommended a book called White World Order, Black Power Politics, The Birth of International Relations, a book I would highly recommend for any student in IA. But after reading it, I learned that historically the voices and perspectives of African and African American international affairs practitioners, academics and journalists, all scholarship that was centered at Howard University in DC, by the way, was strategically and intentionally excluded and eventually purged from the field of IA by white scholars at the time and in a lot of ways to this day. That still rings true, but it also rang true, in my experience at Elliott. And because in addition to the lack of diverse syllabi, meaning that if, for example, maybe the readings for the class, we were talking about Africa or Latin America, but those readings were not, I guess, representative of those Latin American or African perspectives. And so, but I also took note of the lack of representation in the teaching staff and the teaching assistants for my classes. And again, just recognized a real need for a change and decided that would mean creating a student organization with a goal of affirming Black students and providing them with the support, community, resources, exposure, and network that they need to succeed within Elliott and beyond, and with a goal of essentially creating and sustaining a pipeline of Black IA practitioners. But we also recognize that there are other students of color who need the same type of support. And so our membership is inclusive of anyone who is, one, passionate about the intentional inclusion of African and African diasporic perspectives in and outside of the classroom. Two, anyone interested in purposeful work to improve the experience for Black students in the Elliott School. And three, anyone who's interested in upending the overall status quo and paradigm of who can and cannot excel within the field of IA. And so yes, we have a goal of fostering a predominantly Black space for students and young professionals, but we recognize that the perspectives and centering of Middle Eastern, Asian perspectives, Latinx perspectives are also marginalized. And thus we are not exclusive to these groups either. I don't know if I answered your question, but.
You answered it quite well. Thank you very much. Also wanted to ask Maya and Simeon to also talk a little bit about your experience, but also your sort of your inspiration, not only the functional part of the decision to move forward with the organization, but also a little bit of your story in terms of what inspired both of you. I'll start with Maya and then go to Simeon.
I think Hannah covered a lot of the functional part of my answer, but she proposed this idea to me around this time last year, and then over the summer, we were hard at work curating our plan to execute this organization in the summer. But for me, you know, Hannah was one of the only Black women that I saw in my lectures, my 200 plus lectures. And it was, you know, it was so nice because it was just like, to see a familiar face. But then it was just like, okay, so there's Hannah, and then there's this Black student, and there's this other Black student, but it was just to the point where I could count these Black students out on my hands and my fingers. And then that just was not enough for me, because I was like, you know, there's not that many people who look like me. But then I'm hearing voices and people are telling me, no, there's Black students in Elliott, you have to look for them, they're there, I swear they're there. And I was like, I don't really know where to go to find these students. And so for me, it was more of creating that physical space where it is like, okay, I can find these students and they have this outlet and this space to come to. So it's not that I'm going out and looking for these students, you know, one by one, but it's like we all have a unified space to come and to meet and to create that physical space. I was very honored to be able to be part of that experience. And since then, of course, my network of Black students within Elliott, but also throughout GW, has increased because of this physical space, because we not only open up our doors to Black students within the Elliott School, but we've seen Black public health majors and Black engineering majors come to our events for professional and academic advice, because they also feel safe within the space that we've curated. So that has been one of the encouragements, but also one of the highlights of being a part of this organization since the beginning.
Thank you. Simeon, how about you?
Yeah, so to describe sort of how I came into on the team of YBPIA, I would say a lot of my motivation was my freshman year. I had similar experiences to Maya and Hannah, but I wouldn't say that it was as present in my mind how much of a what I guess I was missing. I mentioned earlier before we started recording this sort of duality in what senses of community, what feelings of community are accommodated by the Elliott School, and then the idea that there are people around me who I can talk to about things that I'm interested in from an academic level, but when I think about like who I can talk to about the things that I'm experiencing within the classroom and the sort of professional trajectories that I'm aiming for, but also about the realities of what my identity, the changes that my identity as a Black man will represent when I try to go into those spaces and chart that path. It's a different sort of planning that happens, I guess, on a solitary level. And I consider myself a relatively individualistic person. So at the time, I didn't really think that much of it. I was just like, this is kind of, you know, it is what it is. But Hannah approached me about her idea for YBPIA. And at that moment, it was kind of like a light bulb, like, hey, she's right. Like, this is something that should exist. And I wasn't really 100% sure at the time what direction we were going to go or what that was going to look like. That's one of the things that I'm really proud of us for taking steps towards this year, is figuring out how we can tangibly create that sense of network and that sense of community that people really need. But really just that realization that I need more than just people to talk to about the homework, and that I want to be someone who is creating that and not just sit around and wait for it to come to me. So there's that on the in-house level, but the other side that I'm more interested, well, not more interested in, but I guess I kind of lean towards of our sort of mission statement is this exposure side. Like, as students generally, there's a lot that we don't know about the working world. There's a lot that we need to learn, and fast, because time's a ticking in the undergraduate level, and realizing that that is a challenge in and of itself, but adding on top of the fact that Black students don't necessarily have the sort of arm extended to them to come and learn, like, come with me to this internship, or have you thought about this program? Not because for whatever interpersonal reasons take place, it's just understanding that there's a level of structured exposure and structured reaching out to Black people that needs to take place for us to be able to stay in the field and feel like we have a path that's viable for us to take, and that we can see ourselves in positions of success. That's really what I was what really wanted to tap into. A lot of what we're doing, reaching out to folks, Black people who have amazing careers that I would have never even really thought of until the last year. Just seeing how many people we've been able to reach within this relatively short amount of time is really affirming that idea that this is a good thing that we're doing, and that and make this a thing that is a thing that is available to everyone. As soon as they get into the school, people won't have such a negative experience. And I guess I have to mention that I do feel like there is a sense anecdotally of alienation at the Elliott School, and that's professional and interpersonal. But we just want to create something that alleviates that, and that makes this more of a stronger community that has more access to the potential that's inside of it. And that's really why I signed on.
Cool, thanks, Simeon. So the next question is to talk about or share a couple of thoughts about the places where you do feel a sense of community or affinity. Take one more look at Elliott School and talk about where you do see or feel positive things. And then think about GW. Where do you find community or affinity across the university? And let's start with Maya on that one, and then Hannah and Simeon jump in whenever you feel like.
I guess I could start with the GW network overall. I think Black students on campus have really, especially for the undergraduate level, coming in as a freshman, I was introduced to so many organizations that made me feel safe. I think there's just a plethora of them, from Black Girl Mentorship to the overall just BSU umbrella. And I think Black students have really cultivated a space for themselves on this campus, and they continue to do so. New organizations popping up, and there is really a support between Black students to encourage one another, whether it's professionally or academically or socially. And so I don't really think I have a specific space in GW that I feel the most comfortable, but I think that the Black community overall has made me feel safe and has made me feel incredibly welcomed. I think at the Elliott School, I didn't really truly feel welcomed as an Elliott School student until I was a part of YBPIA. That is the space in which I feel my most safe. That's where I feel where I feel like I can definitely be my most successful. I think that we've provided ourselves with the resources to be successful students, but also to be successful future professionals. And that, I think that's where I get my community from at Elliott.
Yeah, I would just reiterate most of what Maya said. As a freshman, I think I found real community before, outside of Elliott first, but in GW, just, like Maya mentioned, like Black Girl Mentorship, the BSU, and there were just a whole host of different Black organizations that maybe had a few different purposes, but still I was able to meet new people. I was able to, be connected with people who may be in Elliott, for example, who had no idea that they were even an IA student, and just connect with people academically, but also professionally that way, was a great experience, and I think really helped my transition to GW as a freshman. Within the Elliott School, let's see, I found, before even I started YBPIA, I was involved with the Diversity and Inclusion Council with Kylie, the beginning of my second semester. And I think it was here that I really started, I guess, kind of finding some sort of community within Elliott, being surrounded by a diverse group, quite frankly, of individuals who wanted to see a lot of the same things that I wanted to see happen within Elliott in terms of diversity and inclusion. And so we were planning events and mixers to really cultivate a community, because we recognize that it is lacking within Elliott, and it's something that's needed. And so yeah, that was before YBPIA. And so I think now that I've started this organization, I've definitely found community within it. But because we are now an Elliott affiliated organization, I've also found community, among other Elliott affiliated organizations as well, like Sigma Iota Rho and DPE, who have collaborated with us over the course of the year, with events and different initiatives. We did a fundraiser with Sigma Iota Rho as well. And so they've also been welcoming, as well, and really cultivated community.
For me, I would have to identify, I lived on the Vern last year, so I would have to say everyone who was in my hall was kind of built into that LLC, the Global Connections LLC, that unfortunately is no longer around. But all the people there, I had a good experience with my freshman year. But again, I have to harp on the idea that there are different aspects of people's personality and people's identity that are tended to with different groups of people. So, in terms of having friends and having people I could talk to about class and things, that's where I got most of that from. But it wasn't until I had more experiences with some of the Black people who are on the main campus, particularly with the Black Men's Initiative on campus, where I really had that sense of connection on a different level. There's a bit. It's just the ability to speak more to commonalities among people who come from similar backgrounds. That, in terms of that sense of community, I really didn't get that until I started engaging with that group. And even now, I would say a lot of my building of my network, or my social network and my community, is still really just beginning. Obviously, with the pandemic, there's been some pretty solid obstacles to that. But what I'm really most excited about, what I feel most drawn to as an idea of, I guess, a space to feel a part of, is the one that's more, I guess, sort of conceptual, of thinking about what we're trying to build with YBPIA, thinking about the circles, the social circles that I want to engage with next year, and just thinking about the idea of being more intentional about what that's going to look like, and making that space for myself. So I guess that's it for me.
Great, thank you guys. You mentioned a couple of words I want to refer, each of you mentioned a term that I want to come back to at some point. But what I wanted to ask you about now is, you talked a little bit about intellectual space. What about physical space and sort of emotional needs? Do you have that there at Elliott? And what's it look like? What's it feel like? And if you don't have it, what might it look like? And let's start with Simeon on this one, then we'll go to Hannah and then Maya.
Yeah, so Elliott, it's obviously a very nice looking building, but I wouldn't necessarily say and I'm realizing now that it's been a while since I've physically been there. But I wouldn't necessarily say that. Again, this kind of goes back to the idea of the differences in the different parts of a person that are tended to. The Elliott building very much communicates that this is a place of learning. This is a place of professionalism. It's very sterile. They have like the metal things going around, the white marble in the floors, which is nice. And it's good. It makes sense why it looks that way, and it makes sense why it is that way. But I don't think that it's a place where people necessarily hang out. And I don't know if that's something that we want to move towards, or I think that in the GW community generally, the place that Elliott fits in, when I think to myself, is, or I get the sense that it's kind of like social sort of circles are outsourced to the greater GW community, and that the Elliott community is kind of reserved for those more less personal, like professional interactions, especially when you're actually physically in the building. So yeah, again, I have to say that like it's been a while, and I've only been there for a couple months out of my freshman year. So I need probably some more time to think about what it would look like to have that place different. What aspects of the physical Elliott space I would feel most comfortable in just being, and having more thought about how it is now and what it could be. So I'll have to leave it on that kind of ambiguous note.
Yeah, that's cool. Hannah, how about you? Anything about, again, the physical space?
Similar to Simeon's point, I think I sort of compartmentalize the Elliott School professional atmosphere with community atmosphere. And I think there's a way to sort of bridge that gap, right? So, and this is something the Diversity and Inclusion Council was working on before, the pandemic. We were working on some initiatives that we could collaborate with the MSSC, and how we could bridge some for like the very professional, Simeon used the word sterile, I guess kind of atmosphere within Elliott, and I don't think is a bad thing. I mean, I feel like the very, at times, pretentious culture in and outside of the classroom within Elliott really pushed me and motivated me, and it made me to be, quite frankly, the student I am now. And so I don't think it's entirely a bad thing, but I think there is a way to bridge that gap between a physical space that can support students' emotional needs, or I guess, yeah, with, I guess, some type of professional academic support as well, if that makes sense.
Cool. Any thoughts, Maya?
Yeah, I think I definitely agree with everything that both of my peers said. I think, I think definitely like pushing to have events that are discussion based like this, but even more on a deeper, like informal level where people can feel really comfortable to share their experiences and their thoughts, and feel safe in doing that. So it's not just, we are, allowing, putting students in a position where everything has to be extremely formal, they're extremely professional, and students aren't able to, truly, I guess, express grievances or express opinions. In that way, we could create more community. But I do second what Simeon says. I think the Elliott School environment hasn't really that physical space. It's not very encouraging for that at this point, but that doesn't mean that we can't get to that place.
All right, we're going to ask just a 1 word or 2 word response question for you. When you go home, or when you go someplace where you feel exceedingly safe, what is that one thing you look for when you go there? Just a quick response from each of you.
I can go really, really quickly. To be understood. I think that's 3. To be understood. To be understood. Yeah.
Hannah, how about you? What do you look for?
I don't want to say the same thing Maya said, but And it's almost like unexplainable. Like when you're just with a group of people and you just know, like instinctively, okay, these are my people. This is my group, and it's because you may connect with them culturally, but also maybe just interest wise, something just connects. Maybe it's like synergies or something like that.
It's interesting. I see that picture over your head, Hannah, and that makes me feel safe. Simeon, what about you? Quick response.
I guess the word I would use is secure. And the reason I would use that is because I'm thinking of a sort of quote that I don't remember if it's an actual quote or just something I heard once, because this was a big conversation in my high school. It was that the difference between being in a community and belonging to a community is knowing that when you leave, you'll be able to come back. And actually I don't think that's actually the wording of it, but I'll have to come back to that one. But it was something along the lines of knowing that it's there, knowing that you belong, even if you're not there. So.
Those are, each of you have shared really traditional retention and welcomeness sorts of quotes and perspectives, and that's really helpful. So one more question. We're going to talk a little bit more about the function and the creation of the organization, but I just want to ask one more question of you. What would you add to the Elliott School in terms of either color, art, imagery? For example, I look at the picture above Hannah, and that speaks to me. What would you add to Elliott School, and where would you add it if you felt it was important to bring flags, home culture, food? What would make you feel at home in a building that someone described as efficient and sterile? And just fly an answer in. Yeah, all of you guys unmute, the three of you, just unmute and fire in. Just a real quick 30-second response, 20-second response. What would you add?
I like your idea about maybe flags, maybe as you come in to the Elliott School and you see like a long line of like every flag, I guess, in the world. That would be really, I guess, I don't know if the affirming is the word, but maybe set as maybe a reminder about what we're doing and why we're here. But in addition to that, I know that Colin Powell his face is listed, like as you're going up the stairs you can see him. But if it was more like if I saw it, I don't know, I guess maybe because it's kind of out of the way, so I only see it if I'm looking to the side. But just in addition to that, maybe just having or featuring people like Condoleezza Rice on like the wall or something, just like some form of like inspiration or something similar to that nature. Because I'm thinking in Thurston Hall in the study room, and people probably don't even notice it, but I remember writing a paper and it was like 12 a.m. and I saw there was a picture of Martin Luther King on the wall. And so just looking at that, it just made me realize, okay, I am here for something that's bigger than myself, right? And so if he did it, and he did way more than currently what I'm doing, I'm good. And so but it was just something simple like that.
I think you hit it when you said affirmation. I mentioned in the chat earlier that anybody that can use the word pedagogical before 6 o'clock is all right with me. So I think that's a great thing. Simeon or Meyer, any thoughts about, again, color, images, flags, people, perspective that would speak to you, that would give you that sense of safety and also of possibility?
Hannah, I really like the idea of the flags. That was actually really good. Mr. Tapscott, that was good. But also, we do have pictures of alum that are on like those like cylinder like blocks as you walk into Elliott. So that would be nice if we could have more diverse faces. A large part of our organization is reimagining the academic resources that are presented to students. It'd be really nice if we could have like a physical library. We could go in and actually read these books and see these academic sources. That's something that would be really nice, like a set of diverse books, because it's so, so important. It's imperative to our major, that we read and we take in as many academic sources as possible. So to have that space, that would also be nice.
Simeon, anything?
For me, I can't really think of any physical imagery, although I'm sure there are things that could be thought up, like in terms of having more diverse faces on the wall and things like that. But what really speaks to me more is having things up that remind you of the immediate community that you're existing in. So more along the lines of like people spaces and like tasks that you have participated in with said people. So for example, if there were more, like at my old high school, we went around and planted trees with the faculty members after school. And that was a thing that we all did together. And they had like plaques of the trees and obviously the physical trees, and there were pictures of the things that we did. And although not everyone participated, it was something that it was a task that we did together, that the different components of the community and I did together, administrators, faculty, and students. So if there was more of a focus on the people who are here now, and I guess less so, and again, I understand why it is this way, and I appreciate the attention to the eye that is sort of on the Elliott School, but if there was a bit more intentionality in highlighting the folks that are here now, like research that kids are doing with faculty members, perhaps being more like shown on the wall and colorful things, having just more opportunities to make that a centerpiece of what you experience when you come into the school, instead of the sort of, well, not instead of, but I guess to balance out the sort of projecting of what can be and what has been. Yeah.
Great, thank you. The next question is a little bit about process. What advice would you all give to any other group of students who would be interested in developing an affinity space much like yours? What thoughts do you have in mind? And let's go Maya, Hannah, Simeon.
I think, even if there isn't this general consensus that there is a immediate need for your space, that doesn't mean that you shouldn't go out there and create that. Membership can look like 50 people, it can look like 20 people, it can look like 10 people, it could just be you and somebody else. But as long as you believe that there is a need for your space, then that means that there's a need for it. All you need is one person. So don't feel like, you shouldn't go out there because you aren't receiving as much support as you would like for you to create this community. Because if you feel like it, I'm sure there's other people who identify the same way that you do, and they have those same feelings. So there's resources out there for you to curate these spaces for yourself. So don't have that setback or the mindset that the membership may be too small or not that many people may be engaged, because if you believe that there's a need, I'm sure that other students also have that same thought.
Yeah, just echoing what Maya said. If you in yourself you feel that there is a need for a certain space, a certain affinity, then I wouldn't hesitate on it. And just thinking about like when I was starting YBPIA or in the process of doing so. And just as a side, I just experienced a lot of just like self-doubt. Like this isn't really needed. There's already like a ton of Black organizations, you know what I mean? And so, but within that, I was also thinking there's not even like enough Elliott students to be a part of this. Little did I know. And so just staying true, I guess, to in yourself, okay, there's a need for this and I'm going to act on it. I'm not going to think about any other factors that may come into play. But another thing that I was going to say is really making sure that you're moving with intentionality. And so don't just like create an affinity group without, I guess, just bringing a lot of purpose, intention, and also, I guess, a plan of action. So you've created this group, but what is this group going to involve, and what initiatives and what ways are you going to really create tangible and long-lasting change within the physical space that you may not have originally been comfortable with, but now that you've created this space, what is change going to look like within both spaces, if that makes sense?
Absolutely. Simeon, quick response from you, and then we're going to go to questions and answers.
Sorry, can you re-ask the question again?
Sure. Can we start questions and answers? No. The question was, what advice do you have for someone else who might be interested in creating an affinity in your model?
Sorry, I just drew a blank there. But what I would say briefly is understand the parts of your organization that are for you and for your membership, and the parts that are supposed to interact with the larger community in which it sits. A brief example of that, I would say my old Black student union used to be called the Black Awareness Club. And the connotation of that was kind of confusing and problematic, but we just asked ourselves, what is there to be aware about? And so we changed the Black Student Union to sort of accommodate that idea that there are things that we do here that aren't for anyone else, that stay within the four walls here. And that's part of our mission and part of our purpose, and being able to understand that distinction is, I think, important.
All right, great. Thank you all very much. We're going to see if there's any questions and answers from any one of the participants, or any one of the folks in the audience. You can raise a hand. Go ahead. Is it Roli Lai? Lau? How do you pronounce your last name?
Roli Lau.
Roli Lau. Please fire away.
Great, thanks. I really enjoyed the presentations. And I wanted to ask, I liked the part where we're talking about physical spaces, and it's something that I've been thinking about a lot. As you know, I'm the faculty co-chair of the Diversity Council, and I also noticed when I go into the Elliott School that it's a little clinical looking. I could interchange it with a hospital on a given day and probably no one would notice the difference. But it's also very professional looking, which is positive, and it helps you bring that up. So what I wanted to ask about was, one of the things that goes through my mind sometimes is, what if we were to do something like request students to submit art? And then, not just have everyone, but, maybe like we did a memo competition, have, people select, what kind of art do we display in a certain place on rotation or something like that. Would that help bring in a feeling of inclusiveness? Or do you think that would just be a little too amateurish, and it's better to stick with the, hey, let's have someone professionally select our art and put it on the walls for us? These type of ideas, something kind of different.
Yeah, sure. Any of the students, please take a shot at that. And I would also say that's actually probably another conversation, because we've kind of, and I apologize, sort of led the conversation around intellectual affinity spaces versus physical. I think they're all tied together, and that's part of the point we wanted to make. But any of the students, please respond to Professor Lal. That'd be great.
I like the idea of collecting things that people made, just to reiterate the sort of thing that I went earlier, just because it's people that are here now, things that people did, even if it's not that good, it still reminds you of folks who are around you, and you can put a picture to a face, and it just means more, I think, if that were a hypothetical thing that were to exist. And yeah.
Going off of Simeon's point, I think it would be, I think it would bring a level of maybe connectedness to the Elliott School. If I created this art and it's like in the Elliott School, I'm also an Elliott School student, then it's, I don't know, it maybe kind of breaks a wall or some type of barrier that was, I guess, kind of inhibiting some form of like community or inclusiveness within Elliott. If I'm now a part of physically the Elliott School, if that makes sense.
Yes. I'm so sorry, Mr. Tapscott.
No, please go.
To echo everyone else, I think that would definitely be something that was nice to see. I like the point that Simeon brought up, sort of like focusing on, what is to happen or what has happened. There's so much that's happening in the present tense, and so to highlight those things, I think that'd be a really good opportunity.
All right. Any other questions? Any other thoughts people would like to share? You know, physical space is really important. Architecture is really important. Art and imagery is really important for making people feel at home. And the challenge often is that as Americans, regardless of our racial or ethnic background, we're all comfortable with the things we see in America every day. So we often don't notice the difference until we're faced with the difference. Someone else had a question? All right, I'll tell a quick story. Was driving in Cincinnati late at night, going to a program called the Black Man Think Tank. It was a long time ago, so there weren't very many people of color in Cincinnati downtown, and I was nervous. I didn't want to stop to ask questions, but I was driving around the University of Cincinnati and I couldn't find anybody like me. About 200 yards away across the quad, I saw an office that had its light on, and there was a Jamaican flag. 200 yards away, and I felt a wave of comfort, and I parked my car and I walked straight there. And interestingly enough, I found my people and I found my purpose, and it changed my entire experience of the University of Cincinnati. So it's a subtle but powerful thing. Professor Lusk, I'm going to send you that quote. I have it teed up here for you. I'm willing to send it to anybody else who'd like to see. Well, here, I'll read it really quickly. It says, when you plant lettuce, if it does not grow well, you don't blame the lettuce. You look for reasons it is not doing well. It may need fertilizer or more water or less sun. You never blame the lettuce. Yet, if we have problems with our friends or family, we blame the other person. But if we know how to take care of them, they will grow well, like the lettuce. Blaming has no positive effect at all, nor does trying to persuade using reason and argument. That is my experience. No blame, no reason, no argument, just understanding. If you understand and you show you can understand, you can, and the situation will change. I think it's a great way. So everybody is lettuce. We do not fire students. We give them the fertilizer they need to grow. Any last thoughts? Professor Lal, go ahead.
Sorry, I had one last pesky.
No, please.
So I was curious because we are talking about affinity space also. And I was wondering, I've been pondering for, again, some time, thinking, what is a way to build more community between Black students and white students? And I know it's not obvious. You know, while you're swimming in an ocean at Elliott of, quite frankly, whiteness, you know, and I think it's actually, you know, it would be positive if we could build more community, interracial community on campus. And I was wondering if you all have any ideas about what you think might work for that. You're muted, Michael.
Sorry, I thought I hit that button. Students, please, I would encourage you to respond because I think your insight is really important. It's a really important question, particularly at a predominantly white institution in a field that's starting to diversify, but may not have the history of diversity that some of the other programs have had here. It's a tough question.
I stumped them. I stumped them.
For me, I think personally, I always feel like it's very hard to ask students of color or minority students on what role they can play in cultivating a diverse space or like cultivating relationships with other students of color or just like non-Black students of color. And so I always find it hard when I get asked that question because I don't really, personally, I guess, I don't know, I think it's, personally, I find it very hard to what role I have in creating a diverse space because like, I think my like the existence of me like as a Black woman, that in itself is diversity. So it's like, what more, I guess, I don't know. I don't know if Hannah or Simeon has any thoughts, but it's a very tricky
question. It's not necessarily what you can do, but even what Elliott could do to,
what Elliott can do, okay,
to create that type of a space or that type of community. So it doesn't necessarily have to be the onus on you, if you get what I mean.
It's a really good and hard question. You know, and initially I interpreted your question similar to how Maya did, like as like the onus is on us to, bridge this gap between white and Black students. I think the first word that comes to my mind is understanding. I think there may be a lack of understanding maybe between Black and white students, but personally, I haven't had any, I guess, encounters, so to speak, with my other white peers. It just may be that they don't recognize maybe the biases within the curriculum or what we're learning. And so I'm frustrated with that. It's not necessarily me being frustrated with them personally. I haven't had any experience like one-on-one in that regard. Yeah, I think it's really maybe a lack of understanding. But I'll get back to you with a really good answer.
Yeah, like Maya and Hannah said, obviously something I have to give some more thought, but what sort of comes to my mind right off the bat is that the idea that, I mean, I already have a good mix, and I'm sure that every other Black student, just, because of numbers, already has that experience of having the, I guess specifically in this case, the white people that they interact with and the Black people that they interact with. And the issue I think that you're trying to get at, Dr. Law, is how to create a bridge between not just like the individuals, but the community. And what I would say is that I like the idea of people coming together to do something first and foremost, and then over the course of completing that task, sharing things about each other and connecting as people. So having more things that we do, and this is very incredibly intangible, but I'm just speaking conceptually here. I feel like the way that those deeper connections with more groups of people happens is particularly by amplifying the things that people are interested in as individuals, and then having those things bleed into the respective communities that people are a part of. And I also feel like that's particularly important because it really recenters the idea that this connection that we're trying to build is literally just between people, and not between these banners of some ethnic nations that have to come together and through some heroic act of diplomacy find some common ground. I think that it's just there's a degree of even within the context of like affinity spaces, like there was a conversation that people have had about whether or not there should be a white student union that exists for the purpose of getting people to engage with other diversity groups or affinity groups. And I mean, anytime I engage with white people, my white peers, with a topic that is explicitly about the realities of racial inequality globally, but particularly in America, I just personally feel like already a barrier, just because I feel like people are afraid to sort of step out. I feel like people feel like they have to speak for this thing that they are intrinsically a part of, and that they have to have some role that they play. Like, for example, anytime there's a conversation about anything remotely related to race, a line that a lot of white people will lead with is, "As a white person, I think this." And I understand the intention behind that, and this obviously merits a more nuanced conversation than what I'm giving here, but just that idea that like people are speaking to me as X and not as like Jack or as like other individual name person. I don't know. I just feel kind of frustrated sometimes because I just don't personally stay in those spaces of the names. But to bring it back to, I guess, a more tangible sort of solution-based thing, I think just have more opportunities for people to do things together. And through that, if you're creating things that people are coming to because they're genuinely interested in, then the rest will come. And if that's happening in conjunction with people having a place that they can go back to, particularly people of minorities who don't otherwise have this opportunity, like a space that they can go back to share these experiences and I guess tend to those other parts of their identity, then the two of those sort of things comes together. Just understanding the multidimensional aspects of people's identity, and that the place in which we all are together is that we're all here at school trying to receive some degree of certification to make some kind of financial future for ourselves, but also to have an experience with other human beings and to learn something new and to be a part of that community. So on the, I guess, top down level, that's the only thing that people can tend to and can really, what I would say, think about and focus on is like, how does our broader community as a school, as a group of people having this experience together, how are we making them together? Yeah, that's again, I've kind of fragmented my thoughts here towards the end, but
That was
that's what's
really
on my mind.
great, Simeon. I have to say that was so insightful that I'm thinking we're going to have to tap you to teach some classes or something next. So that was,
I think
about that.
You got young faculty getting prepared here based on vocabulary and content today. I just wanted to weigh in really quickly, and then I have to be mindful of times. I know there's another session coming up, but one of the challenges of being a minority in the modern age is the expectation that, you know, we do have all the solutions. But the reality is, I think there has to be a balance, because the only thing that moves or makes change is power and authority. And power and authority unchecked or unguided has no value. That's the American story. We've repeated this pattern year after year. I always encourage students, while, you know, to push back against necessarily being given the onus of responsibility, but if you don't take responsibility, the system will replicate what it's replicated throughout the last 400 years. And so I hear a lot of young people talk about, you know, it's not my responsibility. And I agree with that. It isn't, it shouldn't be. The challenge is that we don't have people in places that have the authority and the power to move the kind of change we need. So I always encourage students to think of themselves as the next power and authority or guiding light around change. Because invariably in a capitalist system, people will only change things that make sense for them. People will only change because they want to or because they have to. And the problem with being changed because you have to is that as power shifts, people shift back to things they feel comfortable with. What you try to do is build community around wanting to change, and then guiding people on those changes and building community, but also standing firm to take the lead whenever and wherever you can. I would never wait for an American system to try to change the race challenge in this country unless there were significant numbers of people in authority and with the power that reflect the right ideology to do so. So I definitely get standing for, like, hey, it's not my job, but it's got to be somebody's job. And if you don't want to take the job, guide the process. Hold people to the fire. Maybe that's the more important job. So anyway, we are at 5:07. I know there's another session at 5. I don't know if anybody else wanted to get there, but this has been a really exciting and enjoyable conversation. I'm so impressed by Maya, Hannah, and Simeon. Oh, I'm with you. Big applause. You guys are amazing. And if this institution doesn't recognize this and make you the next 3 international affairs faculty members at GW somehow, I think they've missed significant opportunity. That's where you could throw that onus in. University has the onus of recruitment and pipeline development of faculty is on the university. So you let them know you're there. That's all you have to do. Any last closing thoughts, anyone? Any of the students in particular? Hannah, you're the president. Yeah, there you go. I saw what that said. Scholarship that child. Hannah, why don't you share a closing thought and we'll call it a day.
Just to like wrap up, what we discussed.
Yeah, you said pedagogy, so it's going back to you. Or else-
Can you share that
Maya's ready.
quote? No, that quote by your dad. That's something that I always like to hear.
Oh, okay. So in the words of my father, you will perform how you practice. And so when I think about my time in piano or basketball or volleyball, I'm in the game, right? But I wasn't going to perform well if I didn't practice, if I didn't prepare beforehand. And that goes with the same with chorus or piano, like I said. But to connect that to the Elliott School, if we are not intentionally and actively practicing in a way that, when it's time, we're performing in a way that is exemplifying diversity, inclusion, and diverse perspectives, then it won't happen. Because to go back to my first point, you will perform how you practice. And so what needs to change first is how we practice, right? And from there, we'll see a change in performance.
Wow. So what would the young people say? Mic drop. It's not exactly a mic, but I was trying to fake it. Thank you all very much. Professor Lau and Professor Lusk, I will send you all this lettuce quote, and I'll send it to you young folks too, because it's a really good one to throw on people. And what it also says that everybody has the capacity to be excellent, and it's part of our practice to affirm people in that regard. So anyway, take great care. Thank you all for being here. Young people, stay wonderful, keep growing, be amazing.
Bye, thank you
So much.
That was
Take care,
great.
everyone.
Bye.
Y'all are awesome.